Hello, everybody. Evan Lazar, Alex Barth, live Patriots Beat podcast brought to you by betonline.ag. Alex, today, some more rumors out there, more smoke, I'll call it, about Julio Jones coming to the New England Patriots. We're going to talk a little bit about Julio. We're going to talk a little bit about OTAs. We wanted to start the show with the news about Julio Jones. A couple of reports coming out today. One of them was from Chris Sims, so I got to take that one with a little bit of a grain of salt. But Chris Sims did say that Julio Jones has narrowed his list down to the Titans and the Patriots. We were talking about this earlier, Alex, and you brought up a good point. Julio doesn't have a no-trade clause, so he's not in full control of where he's going to go. But as maybe the best Falcons player of all time, is that too rich to say? I mean, he's definitely in the conversation for the best Falcons player of all time. It behooves the Falcons as an organization to make sure that Julio's happy about where he goes, right? If you treat a guy of that stature, he's going to one day be in their Ring of Honor, be in their Hall of Fame, all that kind of stuff. That type of player you want to make sure you take care of in this type of instance. But has anything changed for you? Do you have any evolving takes on Julio Jones that we didn't go over last week?
I do. I also want to point out, I don't, I wasn't alive back then. Was Deion Sanders still doing his thing when he was with the Falcons, or was he kind of later on at that point?
Yeah, I think he was that was towards the end of Deion's career, if I remember correctly. And he was still Deion Sanders. And, look, Matt Ryan's had a great career.
Right. So I was going to say, too, if you want to weigh the quarterback position, I might even put Michael Vick ahead of Julio just because of what, Michael Vick meant for the game.
Somehow I forgot about Michael Vick. I don't know how that happened, but
I think the Mount Rushmore, three of the spots are Ryan, Vick, and Julio, and then you can figure out who the fourth spot is from there. But Tony Gonzalez is a good name in the chat there. So my evolving take is this. So first off, what you said about the Chris Sims report, right? I hate to be a wet blanket with this, but I'll remind everybody where Julio Jones wants to go does not necessarily matter. It's not completely irrelevant. But Atlanta's going to want a good return. They're going to. And I don't think that, they might say, give us 5 teams and we're going to get the best offer from there, right? Yeah. They might do it like that. I don't know that it's, I want to go to the Patriots. I don't want to go anywhere else. Send me to the Patriots. I don't think that's what we're going to see with Julio Jones. Now, the Patriots are on a short list. It's encouraging, but after seeing that, I don't feel any better or worse, maybe slightly better, but not significantly, that Julio Jones is going to be a Patriot. Didn't sway me one way or the other. Here's my other take. If there's one team, Evan, that should go all out, sell the farm to get Julio Jones, it's the Tennessee Titans. I believe if you add Julio Jones to the Tennessee Titans, I don't know that they have the most talented roster in the AFC because Kansas City still has Patrick Mahomes, but in terms of some of the regression we saw from Kansas City last year in the Super Bowl, they have a lot of new pieces. We need to see how they'll fit. There are some questions. Losing Sammy Watkins, what's going to happen after Tyreek Hill in terms of their receivers? There's also film on them now. Tennessee with Julio Jones wouldn't have that. If Tennessee gets Julio Jones, I wonder if they can push Kansas City for that top seed in the AFC. Again,
don't sleep on Buffalo either. Yeah,
I'm not sleeping on Buffalo, but you know how I am about the Titans.
Yes.
I'm not saying they'd have a more talented roster, but I think that they could realistically, for a one-year window, end up with it. They also play in a much easier division, by the way. There's not a ton of talent in that AFC South right now. So if I'm the Tennessee Titans, I'm going all out. That being said, so how does this relate back to the Patriots? It doesn't seem like the Titans feel that way. At least we haven't really heard. There has been a lot of smoke. Maybe they are, and it's all going on behind the scenes. But all of the talk about the Titans has come from Vegas, and it's come obviously from Julio Jones camp. Now, you haven't really seen Titans reporters floating anything that, again, with the Patriots, there's the report of the internal discussions. If the Titans say, you know what, we're good, we like the team we have, then to me, the Patriots are the team that makes the most sense and would be the most willing realistically to pay. I think Green Bay might be willing to get more aggressive, but they just don't have the cap space to do it unless they want to move on from Aaron Rodgers and get Julio Jones as a weapon for Jordan Love, which would be an interesting plan objectively. But I'm watching the Tennessee Titans right now because if the Titans don't want to play ball, I think the Patriots are in the driver's seat. I think that they'll be the most motivated team. I think that they are the team with the assets to get it done. So that's how I look at it right now. I think it's, and by the way, for the record, and I said this last night on Sports Map Radio before the Chris Sims report today, My two favorite teams for Julio Jones were the Titans and the Patriots in that order. I still feel that way.
So just one thing, correcting ourselves. Yeah. Deion Sanders was drafted by the Falcons, so we were on the wrong end of Deion's.
Okay,
wrong end of Deion's career. Showing our age there a little bit. All right, yes. we did not get to see Deion in his playing days, so that's our faults there. We'll wear that one. Moving back on to Julio, though, I also want to point out that basically we're kind of working with a limited group of teams here that can actually do this deal, right? Like there's only about 11 teams that can trade for Julio Jones under his current contract and fit him under their current salary cap. The Patriots are right up against it. They would have to clear a little bit of cap space, but it shouldn't be a major deal. So Julio, I think at this point, if he truly wants to control the narrative and control his destination, he's going to have to rework that deal with the team that gets him. Now, the 2022 dead cap, I asked Pat's cap, Miguel Benzon, how much does a team cost against their dead cap if they cut Julio in 2022? Because I think a lot of teams are going to look at Julio as sort of a one-year rental, right? We're going for it in 2021, where the Packers or the Titans were going for it all. Let's bring in Julio Jones to put us over the top. He only has $2 million in dead cap if you cut him in 2022. So it's a very affordable contract for the most part, I would say. But at the same time, there's not a lot of teams with a ton of cap space. So that's why between that and then the report out there that the Falcons would prefer to send him to the AFC, that's sort of why you get to the Patriots, right? Is a team that has the cap space to pull it off. A team that's outside of the NFC, or certainly outside of the NFC South. Those are going to be the teams that are going to be interested. Now, the Titans, you're the Alabama guy. I don't know, did Derrick Henry and Julio overlap at all there? I think Julio's a little bit older than Derrick Henry. So
that's a very good question. I'm going to look. Keep talking.
A lot of what's going on here, from what I can understand with Julio, is that Julio wants to go, sort of like what we've seen in the NBA, Alex. Julio wants to go play with his buddies, right? Like Julio
I don't even think it's his buddies, because I mean, Damian Harris is recruiting him. It's just the Alabama guys recruiting him, regardless of when they play.
Right, and that's what we heard last week from Michael Hawley.
By the way, didn't even come close to overlapping. Yeah, Jones last year was 2010. Henry was 2013.
Yeah, I thought Julio was a little bit too old, but still, Alabama.
This is what the Alabama guys do, though, and this, I mean, we've heard this because there's so many of them on the Patriots. There's a chain. All of the Alabama guys talk. They're all the guys who are at school or in communication with the guys in the league, right? We hear all of these Alabama players talking about what it means. Christian Barmore, right, who was a decade removed, said on draft night that to play with the OG is what he called him, Donta Hightower, really in that Saban era. All of these guys know each other. So there is, I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm glad you brought it up. I do think the Alabama factor matters if it comes down to a recruiting pitch for Julio Jones. And the Patriots, now, Tennessee has Derrick Henry, and he's as Alabama as you get. But, all of the Alabama talent, New England, and by the way, Donta Hightower did overlap with Julio Jones.
Okay.
There
we go.
I think it's not going to be the end all be all, but I think the Alabama talent matters because those guys know each other. They talk, they stay in touch. Damian Harris is another one, obviously. I mean, I could keep going through the list. It's going to matter.
Yeah. So I think that's a big part of this is people that he knows, people he's comfortable with, Alabama guys. Belichick, certainly his relationship with Nick Saban, I think would help the Patriots out in recruiting if that is what it came to. I wrote about it yesterday and just kind of broke down some of Julio Jones's tape. When he was on the field for those 9 games last year, he was unstoppable. Like he was one of the best wide receivers in the NFL still. Now, is there concerns at age 32 that the hamstring, this is sort of when wide receivers, Randy Moss, I think tailored off around 33. T.O. was a little bit later, but 33, 34. Outside of Jerry Rice, that's sort of the cliff, right? Larry Fitzgerald is kind of hung on here as a slot possession type of receiver, but in terms of having that big time impact on the game, 33, 32, 33, 34, that's usually when wide receivers hit that cliff. And we just saw it with Julian Edelman here in New England at 34, hitting that cliff. So Julio's coming right up on it. So maybe his body is declining, but when he was out there, he was certainly as good as anybody in the league last year. One of the most efficient wide receivers in the NFL. So there's still plenty left in the tank, at least from what I see on the tape. We also explained last week about the outside receiver presence, right? The fact that you have these 2 tight ends in the middle of the field. You have Nelson Aguilar. You have a great running game. But what you're sort of missing is that true X receiver that can just line up on the backside of the formation and win a one-on-one or win against press coverage. They don't necessarily have that type of guy unless you want to flex Hunter Henry out or something like that and get creative with it. So Julio Jones unlocks a whole lot of worlds of possibilities, right, for the Patriots. And I think in any other year, we would be sitting here saying there's no way Bill Belichick's going to pay a wide receiver $15 million and trade a second-round pick to get him, right? That's just way too much. But Bill Belichick hasn't operated in his normal capacity this offseason. This has been uncharacteristically aggressive from the start. So this is the cherry on the top of uncharacteristically aggressive, right? If you're truly going to spend all this money and invest all of this in the team, this is truly that last domino to fall. And then we can get into the conversation, if it does happen, of what happens at quarterback. Because if Cam Newton can't make it work with that supporting cast, they got to turn it over to Mac Jones and see if Mac Jones can make it work. And I would bet on one of those two guys being able to figure it out with that cast, right? It'd be pretty hard not to. So all the reasons in the world that this makes sense for the Patriots, it's actually kind of hard to find reasons it doesn't make sense for the Patriots. Like, other than the fact that maybe you could argue that they need to figure out the quarterback position before they
that would be mine. Yeah.
Go that next way. Or maybe Matt Chatham threw out there on Twitter about sort of the hierarchy at wide receiver. So if you acquire Julio Jones, you just paid this money to Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne, and now all of a sudden they're not getting the targets that you originally thought that they were going to get. But at the same time, I think that if your argument is, well, we have Kendrick Bourne, we can't trade for Julio Jones, then you're sort of barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah, it's that's not the way to go. You figure it out, and maybe you restructure Julio's deal and it becomes a 1-year deal, and for 1 year you live with that or whatever. Maybe you send one of those guys back to Atlanta. I mean, that's kind of unprecedented to sign a guy and then trade him, but this whole thing's unprecedented. I want to touch on a couple things you mentioned. So first off, the age, right? The magic number for receivers is 34. Not a ton of guys have done it at 34, but 3 receivers at the age of 34 have caught over 100 passes for over 1,000 yards. Jerry Rice, Reggie Wayne, and Fitz was the last one to do it in 2017.
Yeah.
Nobody's done it at the age of 35. So that is, it seems to be the hard out is 34. So you look at it, you might have 2 more years left with Julio. The other thing I want to add, you said when you consider the cap space, right, that there's only a handful of teams. What's interesting to me is I think when you get to a player this talented, the NFL salary cap can be maneuvered. And I think that if a team really wants him, they'll make it happen. For example, a team I look at that I don't think is being talked about enough is the San Francisco 49ers. And here's why.
Old friend Kyle Shanahan there in San Francisco.
So old friend Kyle Shanahan.
Right.
They also happen to have a comparable contract. I think actually, what's Julio's cap hit again?
It's roughly $15 million.
Okay. So San Francisco's actually in a position where they can trade for Julio Jones and take $10 million off the cap. Right? Are
you talking Jimmy G here?
I am talking because
what's Atlanta want with Jimmy G though?
Here's what Atlanta wants. They are desperately, according to all reports, they are desperately trying to get a first-round pick, right? And nobody will give it. Maybe it's, we saw this happen with Matthew Stafford, right? Where they gave up that extra pick, remember, to get him, right? It was more or less the scenario there. Maybe it's, hey, we'll only give you a second, but if you'll take Jimmy G's contract off the books, we might be willing to talk about, I guess they don't really have a first for a while, but whenever that next first is,
right,
we'll give you that. And then, here's what it comes down to. And then, is Trey Lance ready? Blah, blah, blah. Well, first of all, Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get hurt at some point. So you're going to have to go to the second quarterback one way or the other. The second quarterback right now, if you want to give Trey Lance a buffer year, is Josh Rosen. So would you rather have Jimmy Garoppolo until, let's say, November, and then Josh Rosen? Or would you rather just start the season with Josh Rosen, but Josh Rosen gets to have Julio Jones? Like, honest question, which would you rather have?
Trey Lance.
Well, I'm fine. Let me pose it this
way.
Just
put Trey Lance on the field.
You get Jimmy Garoppolo for X amount of weeks until he breaks down, and then Trey Lance, he has to hit the ground running, but he hits the ground running with Julio Jones.
Sure.
Which would you rather have? Right? You get my point. So, or, maybe it's they trade for Julio and then they send Garoppolo here or wherever. Maybe some team still wants him. You figure that out. Maybe Denver gets back in the mix, something like that. But
I know this is going to be a little bit of a controversial take, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but draft picks are overrated. Like they just are. All right. And they are good in some respects because they're cost controlled and you can get players on the cheap and stuff like that. But if you're a team like San Francisco, you have to think big, right? Because you just thought big at the quarterback position. I like it for San Francisco a whole lot. The other name I'll throw out there for the Niners is, I actually saw this on Twitter, I forget who exactly threw it out there, was Brandon Ayuk. Right? You trade Brandon Ayuk for Julio Jones. Brandon Ayuk was a former first-round pick. So you're not trading an actual first-round pick. You're just trading a first-round talent so that Atlanta's getting something back, right? But I think that's important conversation as well to have, is these player-for-player swaps. It's tangible, right? You know what Brandon Ayuk is in the NFL. You know he's a solid wide receiver. He's not Julio Jones, but he's younger and he's a good up-and-coming player. We saw what he could do last year when the Niners came here. He's a pretty good player. So I don't think the Niners are completely out of it. I know Kyle Shanahan has a lot of things to think about with Julio Jones as well.
Let me throw in real quick with the Garoppolo thing, because somebody pointed out that because I forgot part of the take, and somebody pointed out, and they're right, that Atlanta still needs, like, they can't take on that contract. They need the money to sign their draft picks. If I'm Atlanta, I go to Garoppolo and say, Matt Ryan's just about cooked. And you talk about lowering that cap and signing him to the extension and using Jimmy Garoppolo as the bridge after Matt Ryan. It buys you some time on getting the next quarterback. It's kind of, I've been doing this like once a show now, where I've been, I come up with these tinfoil hat conspiracies. But again, who would you rather have? Just Jimmy Garoppolo or Josh Rosen and Julio Jones?
So can we do this to wrap up the Julio conversation?
Give me the one that has Julio Jones. Sorry, one more take with the Titans.
Go ahead.
Because you mentioned the Alabama connections.
Sure.
There's another connection in Tennessee that bears worth watching. That's Arthur Smith. Right. Who was with Julio in Atlanta.
That's an interesting sort of.
Just got hired.
It's kind of like if Nick Caserio traded Deshaun Watson to the Patriots, right? It's kind of some behind the scenes conversations going on there. Yeah, that's a good angle too. I just want to.
I don't know if it's. Yeah, I guess kind of. Yeah.
I want to throw out two things real fast though. Okay. Well, number one, I see a lot of trade proposals from fans with N'Keal Harry involved, with Chase Winovich involved, with Sony Michel involved. And we need to be more realistic about how much value those players actually have on the open market. Like, sure, if you trade a second and N'Keal Harry for Julio Jones, maybe that's a trade that the Falcons would at least entertain. Right. But those guys don't count for much. Right. Maybe Winovich counts for a little bit more, but Michelle and N'Keal Harry in particular is something I hear about all the time. And those are two guys that are valued at maybe a 6th round pick around the league if you're lucky. Right. So you're really throwing those players into the trade. So if you're going to throw out a trade like that, at least don't make it like N'Keal Harry has any real tangible value because he doesn't. The other thing I just want to mention before we move on is just let's throw this out there. You and I both right now, 2nd round pick for Julio Jones, we're both saying yes.
Yes, I'd like to see. Maybe like get something back. I don't know. The contract scares me. Yes. Yeah. Screw it. Yes. I'm overcomplicating it. He's very talented. Yes. I'm a yes on it too. And I understand the contract in terms of the long-term contract. That's why by the way, that's why I'm a no on a first.
Right. That's why I asked Miguel about the dead cap, because he mentioned that they could rework the deal, right? Which I think is that's option one, right? That's option A, right? That's plan A. Plan B would be, okay, you look around and you say, all right, we get one good year, hopefully, out of Julio Jones. We revisit it at age 33. We can cut him and only have $2 million against the cap in 2022 if he doesn't perform up to snuff, or we think he's falling off that cliff, or if we think that we need to just be one and done with him. It's not impossible to cut him, and it's also a pretty friendly deal to then move to another team if they want to pull like a Brandon Cooks out of it, right? Because next year his cap hit's $11.3 million. His cap hit in 2022 is less than Nelson Aguilar's cap hit in 2022. So they could then maybe flip him again, right? Get that year out of them, flip them again, and get another asset back if they so choose. So there's a lot of options of how they can get out of the longevity of this contract, because the contract is a behemoth when you start to think about him playing out the entire string with the Patriots. But they can cut him, they can flip him again. There's a whole lot of options. So we're both a yes on the second round pick. I think if it takes a second round pick in N'Keal Harry or a second round pick in Sony Michel, we're still a yes, I would assume. So it's really just a matter of, I think at this point, does Bill Belichick and the Patriots actually want to do this, right? Do they actually want to make this kind of trade? Because the compensation, I think, can be worked out.
Well, here's the problem with that. We're both sitting here like, yeah, we'd do it for a second round pick, right? We'd even do it for a second and say like a fourth. Let's say high end for N'Keal Harry. There was some report during free agency that the Patriots might be able to get a fourth for him. So ultimate, optimistic projection, will stick with that. Let's say it's a second and a fourth. If we're sitting here and saying, yeah, second and fourth, that's so easy. Why isn't Tennessee saying that? Why aren't the Chargers saying that? Why aren't the Colts saying that? So that's where you're starting. The question is, where does it go from there? Does it become a second, a third, and a fourth? Does it become a second, a fourth, and a third next year? Does it become, a second and a second next year? I think you're starting at a second. I don't know that it gets to a first. And again, I wouldn't go to a first.
I don't think
that extra year with the fifth-year option is so valuable. They're going to need to do something about the cornerback position. The best way to handle and tackle, by the way, too, is going to be potentially an issue next year. The best way to get talent at those positions is in the first round of the draft, especially when you bring in Julio's cap hit. So I'm out on a first. But to say, would you do a second for Julio Jones? Because that's what everybody's been asking. Would you do a second for Julio Jones? Yeah, I would do it. You would do it. We all would do it. That's the point. But that's why that's exactly why that's not what it's going to be. It's not going to be a second for Julio Jones because there are more than one team involved. There is more than one team involved. Now, if, like we talked about off the top, if there was something where Julio said, unless you trade me to New England or Tennessee, I'll hold out.
Right.
Then that price actually comes down a little bit. But as far as we know right now, Atlanta's still going for the best offer. There's still at least 5 or 6 teams on the table. So we're starting at a second, but it's going to go up from there. So I guess let me pose the question back to you. You asked me, would I do it for a second? Where is your ceiling? Throw the N'Keal Harrys and the Sony Michels out. You can stack those guys up all you want. Those guys don't count. Consider those guys equivalent of draft picks. So I'll say N'Keal's a fourth, Sony's a fourth, right?
Yeah.
Winovich is probably a third. Where is your ceiling on Julio Jones, assuming he either doesn't restructure or minimally restructures his contract?
I think a second and the fifth is pretty fair, right? Bill Belichick doesn't care about fifth-round picks anyways. So
right. Do they have a fifth next year?
We'd have to look that up. A second and fifth, I think, is fair. The one team that I think might entertain a first-round pick is Green Bay, because they are going to
their cap situation. I mean,
their cap situation is strapped, but they're probably going to be picking, if they get Julio Jones and pair him with Aaron Rodgers or in Devontae Adams, what are they picking? 31, 32? They're probably in the Super Bowl, if not, the NFC Championship game. So at that point, to me, Atlanta, when you look at their depth chart, wide receiver is certainly a thing if they trade Julio. I think Calvin Ridley is pretty much the only NFL player in their wide receiver group.
If you want to count Pitts.
Right. True. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. And running back is really thin as well, because they've been working around that running back as well. So Sony Michel and N'Keal Harry do make some sense on paper. It's just, what does the rest of the league want with those players, right? And how much value do those kind of, I wouldn't call Sony a first round bust, but N'Keal Harry certainly trending towards first round bust, at least here in New England. And what are you really getting out of that? So maybe that could make it work. If you're really talking about a second and a fifth or a second and a day 3 pick, maybe Atlanta would rather take a chance on a N'Keal Harry and maybe it can get the most out of him versus just picking somebody in this fifth or sixth round next year.
I don't have the rosters in front of me. I'm sure the Colts, I'm sure the Chargers have that guy that they can offer that's comparable with N'Keal Harry. You mentioned the Packers. I'll give you one other team maybe that, I actually don't know if they have a first. Correct me if they don't. And by the way, the Patriots don't have a fifth, Evan. The Raiders have that. So it could be a fourth. It could be a sixth. Okay, this team does have a first next year. The Kansas City Chiefs.
I know.
Christian Arcand was the first one to point this out from 98.5, but he was right. They lost Sammy Watkins.
Yeah.
Julio Jones, slight upgrade. And they have a surprising amount of cap space. They have the projection right now from over the cap after they sign their draft picks will be about $6.8 million. and they'd still need to maneuver from there, obviously. But we know, I mean, they've been maneuvering all offseason. That would make sense. And the Chiefs are probably one of two teams along with the Packers. Like I'd throw Tampa in here, but I don't think Tampa touches this. There's just no need for them to do it. I could see Kansas City getting involved and being a team that would be willing to offer a first-round pick for Julio Jones.
So the question is I see a lot of people in the chat also mentioning defensive players. You know, the Falcons do need to retool on the defense side of the ball. So like a guy like a Winovich, for example, that's not going to play here, right?
But they need in the secondary.
Right, might not necessarily not play, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
Julio Jones, Jawan Williams, you know, potentially,
right.
You know, those types of trades. I guess you could throw those guys all in there.
But here's the thing: if I'm Atlanta and I'm on the phone with the Patriots and they bring up Jawan Williams, I'm going right to J.C. Jackson or Stephon Gilmore, and I'm not backing down.
I'm hanging up the phone.
I know you are, but I'm going to say all right, if you're willing to trade in the secondary, if you think Jawan Williams is so good that he's worth Julio Jones, then you should be fine with him taking over for these guys you have on expiring contracts. Like that's, you know, unless you're willing to, and maybe you don't have to do it, but unless you're willing to have the discussion involving J.C. Jackson or Stephon Gilmore, if I'm the Patriots, I don't bring up.
I'm not.
Unless you're willing to move J.C. Jackson or Gilmore.
If they had drafted a corner with a premium pick this last draft, then maybe I would be singing a different tune. But you really look at their outside cornerback depth chart, it's Gilmore, Jackson, and Jawan, and that's it. There's nobody else that can play that spot besides maybe if you want to throw Jalen Mills out there. But we saw how that worked out with Philadelphia. It's really thin at that spot. And if you get Julio Jones on this team, you're going for it. In 2021, trading one of your best defensive players is, I think, a lateral move at that point. As good as that offense would be on paper, I think you're moving laterally because of what you're losing on defense by trading one of those two guys.
And you still have nothing locked up at quarterback. So, you know, the thing about wide receivers, as good as they are, as good as the best ones are, they're ultimately only as good as whoever's throwing them the football. So, you know, if you're really confident in Cam or you're really confident in Mac Jones, then maybe. But, you know, Stephon Gilmore, regardless of who's around him, is going to be a top tier talent. Julio Jones is going to be good, but his success is tied to the success of the quarterback.
Really J.C. Jackson though for Atlanta because they don't have the cap space to take on Gilmore. So it really is J.C. Jackson.
Him and work something out.
Yeah, they could potentially work
years
something
or whatever.
All right, can we talk about OTAs? We did 30 minutes on Julio Jones.
I think I said everything I wanted to say.
We said we were going to do 10 to 15. We did 30. That's okay.
Is this our last show before? Oh. It's not our last show before June 1st. I was going to make you a prediction. We have a show on June 1st.
Oh, okay. There we go.
We need to do that show at like 8 o'clock because it's going to, you know what's going to happen. We're going to do the show and it's going to break right after.
We might get it before because, you know, we see a lot of deals this year. The Carson Wentz trade, the Matthew Stafford trade that went down before the league year began in March. So they might agree in principle to a deal before
midnight on June 1st. A little bit madness.
Yeah, you know,
I'd enjoy that.
I could see it happening before. All right, let's talk about OTAs. Thursday, first media availability at OTAs. So hopefully one of us will be there. We wanted to bring up that we're in the teaching basic install part of the offseason program. This really isn't competitive live reps yet, right? So as much as we're going to take away things and we're going to dissect things, we're not really in that phase of the game just yet. So be patient. We're almost there, but we're not quite there yet.
I think, and by the way, this isn't coming from us making excuses. This is a Belichick thing. He said before, it's a teaching camp, even through the first couple of days of training camp. So this OTAs, mini camp, and the first 2 or 3 days, basically until the pads come on a training camp, Bill Belichick calls them teaching camps. Their evaluation, it's really the players against themselves individually, them getting themselves ready, then getting themselves in the best position physically, mentally, working on the technique to compete. And then once the pads come on in training camp, Belichick called it a competitive camp or an evaluation camp, and that's when you start talking about roster moves. That being said, I do think there are things you can learn from these camps. They're just not what, you know, people think you go to camp and you talk about position battles. Who's winning at quarterback? Who's winning at corner? Who's, you know, winning at receiver? All that. That's not what we're going to learn here. What we're going to learn comes from where players are working, right? Who's playing out of position? Who's meeting with different positional groups? Who's maybe doing things differently than they did last year? And we've talked a number of times on the show, Evan, about how important versatility is going to be this year. So that to me is where the takeaways come from. It's not, you know, Cam Newton versus Mac Jones, but we can talk about, you know, or even here's a better one. It's not Chase Winovich versus Josh Uche for those reps. We're not going to learn that, but we're going to learn how each guy is going to position himself to try to win that position battle. Is Chase Winovich getting reps at middle linebackers? Josh Uche getting reps at middle linebackers? Stuff like that. That's what we can take away from these practice sessions.
Right. And with Mac Jones, we can start there with the quarterbacks. All four quarterbacks have been at OTAs, Jarrett Stidham, Brian Hoyer, Mac Jones, and Cam Newton. And like you said, we're not really going to be able to dissect who's playing better at this stage or whatever. But I do think it will be important to see who's Mac Jones running with, right? Is he still with that rookie third and fourth string type of group over on the other field? Or is he already with the ones and the twos on the main field, right? Where is he at in terms of his development and in terms of his mental capacity? Because at this point, we will see some things at full speed, but for the most part, we're talking about running basic install and making sure that you understand the mental side of it. Where is Mac Jones in that sort of trajectory? Because if he's already working with some of the top guys and he's already throwing to some of the ones, that's a really good sign for the Patriots that he is grasping it mentally, which is what I've heard behind the scenes for what it's worth. So I think that there is a lot of optimism that Mac Jones is picking things up quickly, but on Thursday and into June, we'll be able to really determine whether or not that's true or not.
And I'll just remind everybody, and by the way, I wrote what I'm looking for at OTAs yesterday. On Monday, you can find that on 985thesportshub.com. Things to watch at OTAs. And I wrote this in there, and it's less something to watch for and more a reminder. When the Patriots started camp last year, and remember, they did no offseason workouts. They went to training camp. They streamed that practice on Periscope. There was no media.
Right.
Do you remember which quarterback threw first between Cam, Stidham, Hoyer, and Lewerke?
I believe it was Hoyer, wasn't it?
It was Brian Hoyer.
Right.
Because they throw in order of seniority. So I just want to remind everybody that when we get there on Thursday and we all tweet that Hoyer threw the first pass,
right,
and then Stidham
they're going to do that just to troll, right? Even if, regardless,
like Mac Jones, the only thing we can learn from the quarterback throwing order is if Mac Jones doesn't throw last,
right?
Which would be, to me, would be a big deal. If Mac throws before anyone, that would be a big deal. If he throws before, obviously, Cam or Hoyer, that's a huge deal for Mac. If he throws before Stidham, doesn't tell me as much about Mac as it does. They're pretty much checked out on Jarrett Stidham if that were to happen. I don't know how much quarterback stuff you want to do. I have another player where
these are passing camps, though, right? And the one thing I'll mention before we move on is timing is really important at this stage, right? Where everybody is in terms of timing through the progression with getting the football out, not holding the football in the pocket. All these types of things are important. And both Cam and Mac Jones, Mac for very different reasons, Mac because he's a rookie and Cam because he struggled with this at times last year, I think can prove that they are in sync, in tune, in rhythm within the offense. So that would be the one thing that I would look for. It's not necessarily who's got the bigger arm, who's got the better accuracy, who's making the bigger plays. It's more so how do they look in terms of getting the football out, getting through that progression, because you saw Jarrett Stidham at a young age at times just patting the ball in the pocket, ball in the pocket, holding on to it forever. If he gets the ball out quickly, that'll be something that I'll definitely take note of. What's your other position that you want to talk about?
So, well, just because it was interesting what you said about Mac Jones, is he working with the ones in the progression? And obviously, you look at that with all the rookies, how fast they're moving along. But a guy I'm really interested in that conversation is Ramondre Stevenson.
Right.
Because they're one running back short from where they were in the rotation last year. The main rotation, right? The guys who got whatever it was 95% of the snaps were Damian Harris, Sony Michel, James White, and Rex Burkhead. Now, 3 of those guys are back, but Rex Burkhead's still recovering from the knee injury and still unsigned. And maybe J.J. Taylor becomes the 4th guy because you really want a 4-man rotation at running back. Yeah. Maybe J.J. Taylor becomes the 4th guy. Maybe it's Braden Bolden. We know they're comfortable using him in that role. But if the Patriots want somebody who emulates Rex Burkhead's skill set the best, it's Ramondre Stevenson. If Ramondre Stevenson wasn't a rookie, he'd be the obvious replacement. But we know about Bill Belichick and rookie running backs. He doesn't play them. And Stevenson himself, he didn't have a ton of carries at the D1 level. A JUCO transfer, only 160-something carries at Oklahoma over 2 years. He had some fumble troubles, all of that. So I don't see them being eager to get him on the field. But I think there is a role there for him to win. I think there is. And if we notice that, he's kind of up there and he's regularly in the rotation with Damian Harris and with Sony Michel, that's going to be very interesting to me. because again, I don't know that JJ Taylor, Brandon Bolden are going to be able to do what Rex Burkhead did. And I don't know that Stevenson is either, but I think he would have the best shot of those three guys. So I'm really curious to see how fast he progresses through OTAs and then obviously into camp.
Yeah, we had written down other rookies, and that was sort of the other guy that I wanted to see as well, just in terms of reps. They'd signed Tyler Gaffney, and it kind of sounds like he's sort of a camp body, right? Because the Ramondre Stevenson, Mike Reese threw out there. Ramondre Stevenson was still working with the rookies at that point in time, so they kind of needed another guy that could run with the top offense and be that running back. So maybe Ramondre Stevenson, by the time we get out to practice, has already cracked that rotation, or is able to crack that rotation come mini camp, or whatever the case may be. Ronnie Perkins is another guy that I find interesting to watch in this. Sure. What is his role, right? Is he standing up? Does he have his hand in the dirt? Is he playing it all off the line of scrimmage? Where are they sort of going to use him, similarly to conversations we've had about Uche or Winovich or whatever? Perkins, another one of these guys, 250, 255, probably has the power and the body to hold up as a stand-up outside linebacker in a 3-4, but where exactly do they think that he's going to play? I'm sure Christian Barmore is there. We haven't seen any evidence of Christian Barmore being there yet, no pictures of him or anything like that, but if he's out there, we'll obviously take note of that. We also wanted to talk about the wide receiver position, obviously, outside of Julio Jones, the guys that are actually on the team right now. And I'm really fascinated to see how they're running out Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne at this point, right? Like, is Aguilar taking reps predominantly as an X receiver? Is he moving around? Is he playing a little X and a little bit off the line? What's exactly his role? Because right now he is, from a pure wide receiver standpoint, taking the tight ends out of it for a second, he's the most natural fit as an X, right? Playing on the boundary. So where is that role going? Because obviously they're going to have N'Keal Harry getting some reps there too, but is Nelson Aguilar the X wide receiver number one, right? Is he the top guy on the depth chart there, or do they want to move him around a little bit more? I think will be interesting too.
Yeah. I don't want to get ahead of the schedule. I think you could say a lot of that on the defensive side of the ball as well. I've touched on it before with Chase Winovich, Josh Uche, all that. This is what this whole OTA thing comes down to for me, is who's playing where. I'm not worried about who's playing better than who, or the depth chart or this or that. I think this is the third week in a row I've said it. The way to make this team isn't raw talent. It's capable talent at numerous spots. And I'm not saying that hasn't been a point of emphasis in the past year. It obviously has. The dynasty was built on it. But now it's really being put to the test. And I think you're going to see guys doing I think you're going to see it more in past years with guys like Winovich, with guys like Josh Uche, with a guy like Dalton Keene, who probably needs to show some versatility to have a chance to make the roster. I think you're really going to see guys pushed to play as many different spots as possible as they try to trim down this roster. And this is the first chance we're going to get to look at it.
Yeah, Trey Nixon, another name. I wrote about him this week from his wide receivers coach. Ernie Adams is picking the 7th round. He'll be out there, I'm sure, plenty. See where he plays, see if his speed, even though we're not in contact yet, I think that's important with some of these wide receivers too, especially these young guys that we don't necessarily know much about yet. Until we get into contact drills where guys can jam them and ride them and hold them up and things like that, it's kind of hard to see. But Trey Nixon is certainly somebody that I think could be just super impressive at this point of the summer.
I mean, there's always that one guy, right? It was Maurice Harris.
To touch, right?
Maurice Harris a couple years ago.
That are smooth, that are fast, and before you get into the contact period of the offseason or into training camp, it's really difficult to catch up with those guys. You have a guy in Trey Nixon who's running a sub 4.4 and you can't touch him. Obviously he's going to look really good in these types of practices. He knows the safety's not coming down to crack him. He knows that the guy's not going to be able to throw a heavy jam at the line of scrimmage. So all of these types of things allow him to be able to get open. Anything about the tight ends? Hunter Henry is at camp. We know that. We saw some pictures of him yesterday. That'll be an interesting one, certainly to monitor. But the rookie tight ends, or the second-year tight ends, I should say, Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene, what are you looking for out of them? Because Dalton Keene's another one of those guys that could be playing fullback. He could be playing H-back type of role. There's a lot of different possibilities there as well.
Right. So Keen's the interesting one for me. Is he playing fullback? Is he covering kicks? I threw that hypothetical out of him maybe playing a little bit of running back if they just need a body there. How much is he doing and what is he doing? How much is he exerting himself to get on the roster? Devin Asiasi is almost a trickier one, right? Because there is a path for Dalton Keene. I think Asiasi is the better player. He showed last year he was the better player. But with Dalton Keene, he has that versatility where he can play fullback, he can play H-back. What more is Devin Asiasi doing? He's just I can't imagine.
I love Devin Asiasi, but he's not better than anything that Hunter Henry does.
That's the thing. So what's he going to do? Is his path to the roster, right, is being better than Hunter Henry, and that just doesn't seem realistic. He's not a guy who's going to play fullback. He's not fast enough to flex out and play wide receiver. So, I don't know. If you asked, the question was, what am I looking for with Devin Asiasi? I honestly am not really sure. Just enough that I guess he's
too good to cut, right? Like that's going to ultimately be it. Is he too good to cut, or is he a trade asset? Is he so good? Maybe he has a great preseason, right? You have 3 preseason games this year to showcase him. Maybe he has a good enough preseason where we're at the point where Devin Asiasi actually has some trade value. I mean, that might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Well, so I don't know if you need to go. It's possible. I don't know if I wasn't going to go to that extreme. I was just going to say, is he good enough that he's worth keeping that if Hunter Henry gets hurt or if Jonnu Smith gets hurt, he's a guy you plug right in. Can he prove he's that? Or he basically needs to prove he needs to prove he's above. Okay, we know we're going to have Hunter Henry. We know we're going to have Jonnu Smith. If one of those 2 guys gets hurt, is it worth keeping Asiasi on the roster to plug right in? Or is the difference not big enough where whoever we sign, whenever that guy gets hurt, if that happens, we can just bring that guy in, right? We can sign something like Brevin. No, not Brevin Jordan. Whoever that tight end was, they signed from Houston last year for 2 weeks, right? Can we bring in a guy like that? And is the difference going to be negligible, or is it worth keeping Devin Asiasi?
It's not Lance Kendricks, who you were thinking of, but that type of player.
You get what I'm saying? Or who was the one a couple years ago who was good? Was a decent NFL player, and they kept him on the practice squad. Steven Anderson, right?
Oh, right.
So it's that's not who I was thinking of. But it's is it worth cutting Devin Asiasi if one of these guys gets hurt? We bring in a Steven Anderson equivalent, or do we want to keep him? Is he so worth being an insurance plan that we want to make sure he stays on the roster? That's, I guess, what I'm looking at for Asiasi. And then I thought I saw somebody say Matt Lacoste in the chat. I might have imagined that. I don't know what Matt Lacoste does to make this team.
Matt Lacoste is still here. He's out there, and he's been at all these off-season workouts too, like out in California and stuff like that. He's
trying. Like, credit to him. He's trying.
Right. Yeah. I do want to mention the offensive line quickly, just because I have to. Michael Onwenu spoke today. He obviously is towing the company line of saying I'm repping at guard and at tackle. I have a feeling that they know he's going to play guard, right? We all kind of know he's going to play guard. I would be surprised if we see him repping a ton at tackle, just because, look, the Patriots train everybody everywhere, just in case of injuries, especially in game. You usually only have 7 offensive linemen active. So if a couple of injuries happen in a game, then guys are going to have to play different spots, and you have to be ready for that. So they rep everywhere. Everyone besides David Andrews. David Andrews basically, I don't think I've ever seen David Andrews take a rep not at center.
And that's generally how it is with centers.
Yeah.
You work from the inside out.
Right. So everybody else has repped a little bit of guard, repped a little bit of tackle, or like a guy like Ted Karras is repping all 3 interior spots, that type of stuff. But Michael
Jordan Thomas was the tight end. Sorry, Jordan Thomas.
Okay, yeah, Jordan Thomas. Michael Onwenu at left guard. How much do we see that, right? Because that's where we think he's going to play. You're not going to move Shaq Mason at this stage. So it's going to be Onwenu at left guard, barring some injury in camp to Winter or Trent Brown. So what is he doing over there at left guard? How often is he at left guard? Do they kind of tip that hand early on? Will be something to worth monitoring as well. We wanted to get into sort of guys that
real quick. And I know I keep doing this, but one other offensive lineman to watch is Will Sherman, the rookie, because he was drafted as a tackle, but he worked out at both guard and center during the pre-draft process, right? So they signed those 2 guards last week. They brought back Ferentz. They signed Alex Redmond. So they clearly feel like they need depth on the interior. But if Sherman can prove he's good enough to be a backup guard as well as tackle, that potentially saves them a roster spot. If he can be your third string tackle right behind Heron's the backup, if he can be your third string tackle and your second backup interior offensive lineman behind Ted Karras, that might potentially let them carry one less roster, like one less offensive lineman.
It certainly would push out some of a guy like a Corey Cunningham doesn't make
exactly. So, or even a guy like Alex Redmond or a guy like Ferentz. So I don't know that he makes that jump in 1 year, right? Is good enough to playing guard in 1 year that they can do that, but we're going to find out. This is when we start finding out.
And that's did it. Yeah, I don't want to put that on Will Sherman and say that he could do that, but Michael Onwenu came into practice last year basically exclusively as a guard. For me, everybody thought he was going to play guard. And then all of a sudden he starts playing tackle, and you're just like, wow, I mean, this guy can play tackle
Onwenu did it at an all-pro, not an all-pro, at a near Pro Bowl level, right?
Right.
They only need Sherman to be good enough to be a backup.
Right.
So at least to feel comfortable carrying one less lineman. So when we talk about the roster crunch, that's somewhere where maybe a spot opens up. If William Sherman's looking really good on the inside and they don't need to keep, it's probably going to be Ferentz if we're being honest, and they don't need to keep Ferentz, they don't need to keep Redmond, that's a spot where maybe a roster spot opens up, but it hinges on what Sherman's doing.
So we talked to pretty much every spot so far that I can think of. We could talk a little bit about the corners, but I do want to mention Kyle Duggar and the safeties real quickly. I love everything I've heard about Kyle Duggar's offseason so far, right? He's watching Rodney Harrison. He's watching Troy Polamalu. He's texting with Rodney to get tips and to sort of get into that Rodney type of role. That's exactly what I want to see.
He's switching to Patrick Chung's number.
So
little I don't know if it's inside info here, whatever. So I tweeted yesterday something that I made that connection, right? I tweeted out I made that connection and Patrick Chung liked it. So that tells me, and again, I'm stretching here, but maybe there was a little bit of like a blessing of a patching of the torch there. Like it wasn't like, oh, hey, I'm going to wear 23. It was, I think he's taking that. I think he talked to Patrick Chung about that. I don't think he's just taking 23. I think he's taking on Patrick Chung's number. I think there's some symbolism there.
Oh yeah. He's going to be Patrick Chung. Like that's right. They're telling you that now. I still think, and I'll continue to bang the table for this, I still think he has more value as a zone defender than Patrick Chung ever had, right? Like as a guy that can roam in the box, play that robber role, maybe play some deep safety on occasion, but just ball hawk a little bit more than Chung. Chung was in the box, downhill, or guarding the tight end type of player. I do want to see Duggar get a little bit more freedom than that. And that's where the Rodney Harrison comparison comes in. So Duggar, everything that you've heard about him, Reese wrote about him and Rodney Harrison. Patrick Chung is giving them his number. I mean, there's just so many great things. And everybody around the team last year just spoke such glowing praise about Kyle Duggar from the jump. Like right from the beginning of training camp in August, everybody was talking about how good Kyle Duggar already was. Some injuries slowed him down. We saw some flashes of it last year, certainly. So that's going to be a really exciting player to watch in this camp. I think Kyle Duggar come in and really take that next step and be a true impact player on their defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said there. I think that this is a bit, you talk about the year two jump, and at least for me, one of the biggest issues was how is Duggar going to deal with the speed of the game going from D2 to the NFL? And if he did need to make an adjustment, we didn't see it. But now, I mean, a guy like that, a guy that's as instinctual as he is, that now has a year of NFL experience under his belt, I think the jump could be tremendous. So, I'm super excited for him. I will, since we're talking about the secondary real quick, I'll bring up the corners. Yeah. And again, I'm going to talk about, which position are guys working with. Who's the third outside corner? Who's the backup for Stephon Gilmore, JC Jackson?
It's a big one.
I think that's the biggest question facing the team right now. I don't think the quarterback thing's a question. I don't think it is. Cam's going to start week 1.
Okay, that's fair.
Like I'm saying right now.
That, yeah, in terms of depth chart, it's not that big of a question mark. Maybe in terms of performance, it's a bigger question mark.
In terms of, position battles.
Right.
Corner's the biggest one to me. I don't think there's a battle at QB. I think that they want to develop Mac and they're not going to start him right away. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong. I don't think we see Mac Jones for a while. Corner to me is the biggest question. Who's taking over for Jason McCourty? That's a very important role. And backup corner, it's a very important role. And the three top candidates right now are Juwan Williams, who the team has been kind of transitioning to safety, Jalen Mills, who has been transitioned to safety, right, and then Michael Jackson Jr., who is a corner, but he's the third kind of by default. So Does Juwan Williams start working more with the corners? Does Jalen Mills work with the corners at all? I don't know that either of those things should happen. Certainly not Mills. Jalen Mills is a safety at this point. He's proven he's a better safety than corner. I wouldn't go with him for that, but they like experience. And Jalen Mills is the third most experienced corner on this team in terms of outside corners. If I'm, played it
he's
for 4 years.
He's got a ton of reps out there.
In Philly. Right.
A ton of reps out there.
And that's what they'll tell you.
Miserable.
But that's what they'll tell you is he is the reps.
Right. And every single time he saw a double move or any sort of route fake, he bid on it and he got beat over the top. That was the book on Jalen Mills was run a slant and go. Run some sort of double move, give him some sort of fake to bite on, and he's going to bite it every single time. And he's going to take the cheese 9 times out of 10. And the Patriots in that Super Bowl in 2017, we don't like to forget about that Super Bowl. They actually beat him on a double move with Chris Hogan down the right sideline. And that was it on repeat against Jalen Mills. And he just couldn't get that down. Now, the Patriots are really good at teaching their corners to be patient and to trust their eyes and to trust their instincts and not overcommit and open their hips too quickly or too early to some sort of early route tell or early route fake. So maybe they can coach that out of him enough that he can survive out there if they have to put him out there. But that's one that definitely worries you. And I still feel like we talk about them trading out of the corners, like trading Stephon Gilmore somewhere, trading JC Jackson somewhere. If we get to August and we're in late to late August, or even at that last weekend, right, where they're making all those roster cut downs, I wouldn't be shocked if Bill Belichick trades for a corner. Right, if they truly don't feel like
work out Trey Kirkpatrick, and I thought he would have been a perfect fit for what they need in those reps. I think it's going to be Juwan Williams. It should be Juwan Williams. He's a second-round pick. He hasn't played a ton. See what you have in the kid, but yeah, they need it. And then the Gilmore contract thing only complicates it. Is he going to hold out? They need to figure out what's going on out there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, give me one name that we haven't necessarily mentioned or haven't talked about in length that you're really looking forward to seeing or want to see if they can make the team or whatever you want to call it.
Okay, so not seeing if they can make the team, but I'm looking forward to seeing Dont'a Hightower play football again.
Yeah,
he's a really fun guy to watch. I think he's one of the best downhill linebackers in the NFL. Even with all the pieces they've added, I think his addition could mean the most. They missed him last year. He wasn't brought up enough how much they missed him last year. I think he'll have a new role. I think it might be slightly reduced. I think they'll move him around. I'm just really excited to see him back on the field. I am. So that's where I'm at with that.
Okay, I'll give you one. You gave a big name one. I'll give a smaller name one.
I know that's what you were looking for, but I'm excited about Dont'a Hightower. Roll Tide.
It's perfectly fair to be excited about Dont'a Hightower. I'm always excited about the trenches, but because these are OTAs and we don't have pads on, we're not really going to truly get the trenches. Miles Bryant. Is there a role for Miles Bryant on this team? Because he looked so good at times last year, especially towards the end of last season when it really started to click. He kind of struggled in that Week 17 game against the Jets, but in that LA trip, we saw a guy that could really play a bunch of different spots in the back end, play man coverage out of the slot, and do a whole lot of different things. It would really kind of stink if they have to cut Miles Bryant just because of numbers, right? If he can't make this team because they're just too loaded in particular spots, that sort of safety slot defender, like they just signed Jalen Mills to a pretty good contract. He's going to be on the team. What about Miles Bryant? I think that's a really good question going into this one. If you want to look at somebody towards kind of the back end of the roster, I think he's got a lot of talent and ability. I know he's undersized, but I think he's got a lot of skill and has a lot of coverage ability. So that's going to be another name that I'm going to look for to see if they can find a spot for him on the team. There's certainly so many different things we can talk about, though.
So just for me, Miles Bryant's a guy where I've been talking about this. How many spots can you play?
Right. He can play a bunch of them.
He's going to be competing with, to me, Adrian Colbert and Joshua Bledsoe for that last safety spot.
Yeah.
He probably is the most versatile of those three players. Yeah. And I don't know that he's more talented than Colbert, but I don't know that Colbert can do some of the other things that he can do elsewhere. I like Colbert. I do. I think we both do. And he's another guy I'm looking forward to. But I think Miles Bryant is the exact kind of guy who's going to have success in a training camp like this where the roster is as loaded as it is.
The Chargers game last year, the Rams game was the game he had the pick, right? So that was one that stands out to a lot of people. But the Chargers game last year, the whole game plan to confuse Justin Herbert was spinning the dial on Justin Herbert. And Miles Bryant played 4 or 5 different positions on that dial that game because that's what they were doing in the back end to confuse Herbert. He played a little bit of deep safety. Then he rotated in the box and played like a hook zone. And then he played man coverage on Keenan Allen for a little bit. And there's just so many different things that he did in that game. It just was extremely impressive to see a young corner be able to wear that many hats and play all those roles extremely well. So I hope they can find a way to keep Miles Bryant. I think he's going to be a good player in the NFL for a while. All right, that is a good place to wrap it up, though, with our OTA preview. If you missed the beginning of the show, you can go back for the first 25 minutes or so. We talked about Julio Jones in the Patriots and potentially getting traded to the Patriots. Alex and I are going to be back on the show on Thursday. We'll break down what we see at Patriots OTA's first media availability of the offseason on Thursday morning. So we'll be with you on Thursday evening to break that all down. We'll take some questions as well at that point. And then June 1st, that's the Julio deadline at least. So we have something to look forward to for next week's pod as well in terms of June 1st. So people calling for our Bruins takes right now, Alex, if we want the Penguins or the Islanders. So we can wrap it up on that one.
All right. Yeah, I want the Penguins. I think the Bruins struggled with the Islanders all year, so that concerns me. I also think generally the Bruins do better against teams whose rosters are top heavy, right? Look what happened with the Caps. Like they have Ovechkin, who's a great player, and they have other good players, but they're not as well-rounded of a team, and the Bruins handled them easily. You know, Sidney Crosby's an incredible player, but the Bruins have had historic success against him. I don't know that, the third and fourth lines of the Penguins are as strong as the third and fourth lines of the Islanders. The Islanders are a more physical team. Like the Islanders this year remind me a little bit of that Blues team. I don't know that they're as good. I don't think they're going to win the Cup, but I think there's some similarities there. Whereas the Penguins to me kind of look like what the Capitals just looked like. So
I don't know if the Penguins are going to make it through the Islanders based off.
I don't know that the Penguins are going to win, and I'd play either. I think there's positives and negatives to either. I think the Islanders are a more fun series. It's because you get Boston, New York, but I would rather the Bruins play the Penguins. I'd rather the series go 7 games. Whoever wins, just they beat the crap out of each other. But I would rather the Bruins end up playing the Penguins personally. Me
too. The Islanders have been a tough team for the Bruins this year. I think the Islanders have a winning record against the Bruins this year, if I'm not mistaken. The Penguins, on the other hand. I'm gonna say
it's just that one game.
I don't have any statistics to back this up, but I kind of feel like Patrice Bergeron owns Crosby. Like I from everything that I remember from the playoffs and things like that, it kind of feels like that's the type of center when Crosby goes against a guy that can really play defense on you in the middle of the ice, like that's a difficult guy for Crosby to match up against.
So I'll give you the stat that year. Remember the Torrey Krug year? Right. Yeah. Where they made that run and he kind of came up in the playoffs. It was 2013, right?
2013. Yeah.
2013. So this doesn't have to do with Cruz. It's just always I remember that year. They played that Penguins team, and that was a good Penguins team. People thought that team was that team was like, for sure coming out of the East.
Well, they won a couple of cups right after that, didn't they?
Right. And that team was stacked, and the Bruins beat them in it was either 4 or 5 games. Yeah. And Sidney Crosby had no points in that series.
Bergeron owns him.
He didn't have a single point. Torrey Krug owned him. Torrey Krug had more points than Crosby in that series. So, yeah, there is some. It reminds me of that. There is some historic precedent there for sure.
All right. So we'll be back on the show on Thursday. Maybe we'll have a matchup for the Bruins that we can talk about at the end of the show. And we won't talk about the Celtics. We're not going to go there. We're not going to talk about it.
Do they win a game, Evan? Do they win a game?
No, I don't think so.
So apparently Tristan Thompson said today, all the Celtics need, he's talking about what it means to play for the Celtics. All they need is fans in the stands. Apparently that's all they've needed all year. I don't know if I want to believe them and pick them in game 3 when it's like kind of full, but yeah, I think their best shot was game 1. They gave Brooklyn their best punch. Brooklyn stumbled a bit, but they got back up off the mat. I don't know. I think Brooklyn's locked in at this point. I think it's going to get ugly.
So it's getting swept. At best, it's a gentleman's sweep, and it's a
gentleman's sweep. Sure,
5-game series. All right, we'll be back on the pod on Thursday. We'll talk football on Thursday. Not that we didn't talk football.
I know. I like doing like a quick minute. Hey, Evan, you want to see Jaron Duran already?
Of course I do.
I like doing a quick minute around.
I've been talking about Duran Duran for the entire baseball season. I've been texting you saying, "Can we call this kid up already, please? Like, can I not see any more Frankie Cordero in the outfield?"
Danny Santana's playing very well, so
he is. Yes, that's fair. All right.
We might have started doing this like the last minute of each show.
That's your other Boston sports update there from takes about the other teams just as much as our Patriots takes. So come back on Thursday. We'll be back on the pod then. Thanks so much for listening, guys. And make sure to subscribe to our Patriots Press Pass YouTube channel. That's where you can see all of our podcasts, all of our live Q&As. So hit subscribe on the YouTube channel as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on Thursday night, guys.